Okay, here we go. This is Kiana Dakwa,
Okay,
individual term paper.
let me. All right. Okay. Hello, everybody. Um, for my notes. Okay. I go without the notes. Thank you guys for letting me go first. Okay, let's get started. So this is my individual project for the urban population vulnerability to coronavirus all over the nation. So my introduction and objective. The objective of this project was to rank 4 cities across the U.S. from most vulnerable to least vulnerable to COVID-19. The cities that I looked at were Huntsville, Alabama, my hometown, Sacramento, California, Providence, Rhode Island, and Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. During the project, I viewed factors such as disease, race, and poverty. So this is my summary. Um, this table represents my hypothesis and what I learned after doing this study and my conclusion after doing this study. So I originally hypothesized that Sacramento was going to be most vulnerable, then Pittsburgh, then Huntsville, then Providence. But I changed that to be Providence, Pittsburgh, Sacramento, and then finally Huntsville. So I just want to get straight into the data. So, okay, population. The biggest population, of course, is Sacramento, California. Everyone knows that California has a lot of people. Sacramento had the highest, and the lowest was Providence. And I actually think that this population density is one of the most interesting columns. I can say why later on in the presentation. But even though that Sacramento has the largest population, Providence has the largest population density, so the largest population per square mile. And it's really small. If you ever look at Providence compared to Sacramento, they're two different sizes. Okay, so next we're moving on to population over 65. If you just look at the data, you can tell that Sacramento has the greatest number of people that are 65 in their location. The percent of people over 65 in Huntsville is the greatest, though. But since they have different populations, of course, they will have different percentages. Okay, so moving on to the vulnerability indexes from pre-established databases. Okay, so the Social Vulnerability Index was established by the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry by the Centers of um, Disease Control. So this database used 15 variables to help local officials identify communities, what they may need, how much support they may need before, during, or after disasters. So they looked at things like poverty, like vehicle access, crowded housing, and just socioeconomic factors like that. So when we're looking at the Social Vulnerability Index from the ASTDR, Sacramento and Providence are pretty close to one. It's on a scale from 0 to 1, and one is the worst. And Pittsburgh and Huntsville are fairly low. So when we're looking at the second vulnerability index, or the risk index, we are looking at a good spread of data. For Providence, they had the highest risk index, and Huntsville had the lowest. So this I couldn't find much on from COVID-19 Policy Alliance because they wanted me to contact them, and I was stuck on time, so I couldn't contact them to see what factors they actually looked at to get this risk index. So that's that. All right, next I have the Jimmy on COVID-19 index. Huntsville was really the only one that was really low. So I think that Huntsville is one of the more consistent risk indexes between just these three factors, just looking at these alone. And just to say, Jivian, hope I'm saying that right, deals with socioeconomic factors such as food bank access as well as historical outcomes, such as the previous diseases that they've had. Okay, so of course you cannot talk about any urban issues or any diseases, anything that like that that has to do with urban planning without talking about Black people and property, because it is very, very evident that this statistic has an effect on the vulnerability of these cities. So Huntsville had the highest amount of Black people, and personally, I honestly did not think that this statistic was going to be so high. Being raised in Huntsville, I saw a lot of, Caucasians. I didn't see a lot of African Americans in my area, so I was very surprised to see, well, not in my area, but just in my school, because I went to diverse school. Anyways, that's not the presentation. The lowest was Sacramento, California, and when we're looking at poverty, the highest was in Providence, Rhode Island, and the lowest was in Sacramento, California. So Sacramento had the lowest for both of these. Okay, so now we're going to look at diseases. I know that these numbers don't seem very spread out, but because of the different populations, of course, there are different numbers of people who had these diseases. So the percentage of adults with asthma, 11.8, Providence had the highest percentage, and Huntsville had the lowest percentage at 9.6. And here are my two factors that I've chosen to add to the presentation. The percent of people with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD, it deals with the lungs, so it's very relevant to COVID-19. Providence had the highest percentage again at 7.4%. And then lastly, my other factor was diabetes, and Providence again had the highest percentage. I think y'all are gonna realizing which one I changed to be the most vulnerable, but okay. So here are my maps. These are the maps that I found most significant, so I wanted to put in my presentation. Sacramento, California, of course, I had to show you all the population and the population over 65. So it seems like just looking at this map that Sacramento has the largest population over 65. Okay, so next we're going to be looking at diabetes and asthma. So something I want to say about diabetes, you can see right here. I don't know if I can see my cursor, but in Huntsville, Alabama, there is the highest percentage of diabetes out of all of my 4 cities, and I think I'm sure that this has a correlation to the percentage of Blacks that are in this neighborhood, because we all know that there is a correlation between African Americans and their diabetic history. So next we're looking at asthma. You can see just looking at the colors of this graph that the people in Providence are very asthmatic. And just for them to have such a small population, 11.3% is a lot. So I know that this will definitely affect the vulnerability. So my favorite graph, the population density, shows how there are over 9,500 people in 1 square mile in Rhode Island. I would have never known that. That is a lot of people for just a small town. And for Huntsville to be the size that it is, it's only like it's less than 861 people per square mile. So that's really significant. But next, I put the graph of percentage of Blacks, and of course, Huntsville had the most Blacks. Okay, so getting to the end here. Here's my analysis of the data that I found. The reason why I said the population density is my favorite graph is because I did this. I looked at this research paper from the Bulletin of the National Research Center. It's a study in Algeria. And they were saying that the population density and the spread of COVID-19 has a very positive linear relationship. As more people were in one area, of course, more people caught COVID-19 and they had a worse reaction to COVID-19. So Providence actually had the highest population density out of all 4 of my cities. Percentage and population over 65 years of age. Of course, we know that people over 65 are the most hospitalized and the most, they have the most side effects, and they're the most diseased. So Sacramento has the highest population over 65, but Huntsville had the highest percentage out of their population. So as I said earlier, Providence had the highest percentage of asthma, and Providence had the highest percentage of 5.5 people in poverty in their neighborhood, not in their neighborhood, in their location. So percentage Black, of course, you have to mention this. Black is a factor in so many things like urban heat islands, um, food bank, like access to food is very important statistics because racism is very obvious in our urban planning system today. So of course we had to mention it in this presentation. So Huntsville had the highest percentage at 30.7%, then Sacramento, and then it was followed by Providence. Okay, so I know y'all are probably saying or probably not, oh, she didn't say anything about her third city. Like I said a lot about Huntsville, Sacramento, and Providence, but I barely said anything about Pennsylvania, and I didn't really realize this until the end. So I just wanted to put a slide in there for Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is out of the four cities, they are very middleman. They didn't have the most or the least of any statistic that I use. Their population was the second highest after Providence, though, so that was very significant. Their population over 65 was 14.7% and over 44,000 people, which is much greater than Providence. So that had an effect as well. And they also had the second largest poverty rate at 20.5%. But I would still rank this over Sacramento. Okay, so my conclusion. I probably changed this order at least 3 times since you all last seen my paper. But to conclude, I definitely put Providence, Rhode Island at the top of my map because of that population density. It was really, really significant. And then I was looking at poverty and the percent of people with asthma, and I was like, I have to put this on the top because of the numbers that I was looking at. So next comes Pittsburgh because they're second to Providence in a lot of the statistics that I found. And then next we have Sacramento, and then Huntsville because that population density is really low. And compared to the other cities, I hate to put it last because we did have a very strong reaction to COVID-19, a lot of hospitalizations, but compared to the other cities, they just purely weren't as bad. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you all for listening. Does anyone have any questions?
I have a question.
Good job.
Yeah, she did a very good job. And I'm sorry if you said this in your presentation, but what factors did you use? Did you use how to determine like the order you put them? Did you use the most vulnerable overall, or the most vulnerable to have a more serious reaction to COVID, or just more vulnerable to get COVID?
I have all of my rankings vulnerable after they get COVID. So like population over 65, you know that when, of course we don't want them to get COVID, but if they do, or when they do, they will be severely hospitalized, they'll be severely sick, and they have the most deaths. And that is also Blacks as well, and people in poverty, because most of these people don't have access to health insurance and places where they can get medical help. So to answer your question, this is definitely vulnerability after they are getting COVID, not their vulnerability to catch it.
Awesome, thank you so much.
Are there any questions?
Okay, that was really, really, really good. Who is, I know I had another request to go second from Elijah. Elijah, are you still here? Yeah, I think Elijah is another person that's doing an internship. So I guess, who is that, Mackenzie?
I already said I'm gonna go second. This is
Yeah, I
Sean.
think, oh, what? Oh,
I already said
wait.
I was gonna go second in our group chat.
Oh, wait. Oh, let me,
I'm trying to do like another class at the moment too. So I just wanted to go ahead and get mine done with.
okay, I guess. All right. So, okay.
Okay.
Okay. This is, I guess,
Um,
is that okay? All right.
Okay. Hey y'all, I am Ashanti Mitchell, a biology pre-med major, and today I'm going to cover my COVID-19 city study. To start, COVID-19 is a respiratory illness that originated in Wuhan, China. It is more common in older people and those with underlying health issues such as diabetes, asthma, and so forth. For this assignment, we had to look at relative vulnerability, which are stressors that may affect people in certain areas. The factors that I studied for this assignment were the population density, the population, percents of Blacks, percents of people in poverty, linguistically isolated, social vulnerability, people who have asthma, population over 65, income above 200,000, COVID-19 risk index, and JVON COVID-19 index. So for my original rankings for the cities, it was Louisville, Denver, Albuquerque, and Boise. The purpose of this assignment was to see which of the 4 cities assigned would be the most vulnerable to COVID-19 and discover why that was the case. And the tools I used to carry out the assignment was Excel, ArcGIS, census data, the CDC, COVID-19, JVON, and US Environmental Protection Agency, EnviroAtlas. To start, here is a map of all 4 of my cities. As you can tell, Denver has the most population with the biggest circle being 727,000. Louisville was second with 600,000. New Mexico was third with, it was between about 500 and 600,000. And Boise, Idaho had the lowest amount with 228,000. So based off of this, this would put Denver in the first ranking outside of Louisville, but as we go on, this may or may not change. Again, here's the population density, except, well, Denver, of course, still has the biggest population density of 3,900, but instead of Louisville having the second highest population density, it's actually New Mexico, which has 3,500. And shockingly, Idaho with Boise, Idaho with around 2,900, maybe like 24 to 2,900, and then Louisville with it being 1,800 or less. For the population over 65, the most people over 65 was actually Louisville with 92,000, and then Denver with around 80,000, in New Mexico, still close to Denver with the 80,000 range, but I believe it was slightly under. And then lastly was Idaho with 31,000. For my COVID-19 risk index, it was higher in Denver as well. Based off my first slide, I said I put Louisville first, but as you can see, I keep talking about Denver first. It's outranking Louisville and almost everything at this point. So their risk index was 4, Louisville was 0, New Mexico was 0, and Idaho even ranked out higher than Louisville at around 3, 2 or 3. And then my social vulnerability index, this is where New Mexico and Louisville outshine Denver. And New Mexico has an index of 0.68, Louisville 0.55, Denver 0.4, and Idaho 0.137 with the lowest. The most for percent in poverty, it is greatest in New Mexico with 16.9. Then Louisville follows closely behind with about 15.5. Idaho is at 14.5. And Denver is at 2.1. And then a percent adults with asthma. Louisville is at 14.8 with the highest. And I believe this is because we're in the South and people say that your allergies are worse in the South compared to anywhere else. And then New Mexico is next with about 11.5, Denver's at 10, and Idaho is at 8.2. So as you all can tell so far, Idaho is always coming up last. New Mexico is about in the third range. Louisville is second and Denver is first. Although they don't have a lot of people with asthma, I feel that there have been more points that have put Denver ahead for the risk of COVID than those that have set it back. And then linguistically isolated, Louisville outranked Denver for this one, has 77. Denver had 73. Idaho is 66 and New Mexico is 63. And then income above 200,000, Louisville outranked Denver for this one, New Mexico and Idaho with 13.2 for Louisville, about 7 to 10 for Denver. I want to say 4, like 1.1 to 4 for New Mexico and Idaho. So for my results, my final ranking is Denver is 1 instead of Louisville, 2 is Louisville, 3 is Albuquerque, and 4 is Idaho. So Albuquerque and Idaho are in the same place, and Denver and Louisville flipped. While determining my rankings, I overlooked the amount of tourism that Denver brings in all year round. Louisville does have tourists, but our main tourist things are like Derby, Thunder over Louisville, and both didn't happen because of COVID. Denver's COVID-19 risk index was higher than Louisville's with a 4, and Louisville only had 0. And although Denver did not rank higher with people with asthma and with people over 65, they were slightly close behind Louisville, and they had the highest population density. For my conclusion, I would recommend for cities throughout the end of this year to still vaccinate, socially distance, and see if they can have transportation options for people in rural areas, because in a study I did for my essay, it said that 84% of people who tested positive for COVID were in urban areas, yet the rural areas had a higher average mortality rate. So that was kind of frightening, that it was higher than 84%. In conclusion, conducting this research allowed me to see that urbanized areas are more impacted by the COVID-19 virus than rural areas. Thank you. And here are my sources.
Yeah, that was another great job. Does anyone have any questions for Ashanti?
No, but if Elijah is still not ready to present, I'll be more than happy to go next.
Okay, yeah, I don't know if he's coming. Yeah, you can go ahead, Mackenzie. Yeah, I'm here. I'm triple zooming right now. Do not try this at home. Oh, wait. All right, but I'm here. I'm here.
All right, can y'all see my PowerPoint?
Yes.
Awesome, awesome. So, hello, I am Mackenzie Davis, and this is a presentation, COVID-19 from a geographic standpoint. My initial city rankings went from Austin, Texas, being the most vulnerable, to Nashville next, then Charlotte, North Carolina, and then Columbus, Ohio. Here we have my statistics list. As you can see, there is a comparison between a vast number of variables to determine the state's vulnerability. First, we have population size, with Austin, Texas having the largest population, followed by Columbus, then Charlotte, then Nashville. And we have the population density with Columbus, again, having more people per square mile than Austin, then Charlotte, then lastly, Nashville. Next is longitude and latitude. Originally, when using this longitude and latitude, I thought that there would be a certain region that would have more vulnerability compared to others. However, to determine this factor, I would need a little bit more information about other cities to make this analysis. Here we have the population map to give more of a visual view on population size. As you can see, the cities I was given are pretty spread apart. After that, we have population that is 65 and older versus percentage of population that is 65 and over. Columbus has the largest elderly population in between my 4 cities and has the second percentage. This is followed by Austin, which is compared to the entire population, has the lowest percentage of people 65 and older. Next is Nashville, which has the highest percentage population of elderly people, yet compared to the others, it is third place in the highest in elderly population. Then in last place, we have Charlotte, due to the significantly low number of people 65 years and older. And here is my representation, my visual representation of population over 65 on the map. Next is Social Vulnerability Index and COVID-19 Risk Index, where Nashville has the highest risk. I determined that it's due to the high volume of tourism traveling to Nashville during the pandemic. And then there's Austin, which I determined that because the governor of Texas took the mask mandate off rather early in the pandemic. And then comes Charlotte and finally Columbus. And this is my map showing the SVI and the COVID-19 Risk Index. This is the percentage of Black people in the cities I was assigned. Charlotte has the highest percentage, then it's Nashville, then Columbus, and then lastly, there's Austin, Texas. This is an important factor because as you all know, Black people do tend to have a lot more health concerns like diabetes, high blood pressure, all that jazz due to our food that we eat for majority. And we also don't get very good health care. Sadly, unfortunately, that's just how the world works. Next is the poverty percentage. Columbus has the highest poverty rate, while Nashville is in second place, and then comes Austin, then Charlotte has the lowest poverty rates. Poverty also plays a great role in this because healthcare, of course, also depends on in this country how much wealth you have and your insurance and all that. Now on to adults with asthma. If you have asthma, the risk of your symptoms being more severe is higher due to the fact that COVID-19 is a respiratory illness. Nashville has the most adults with asthma, followed by Charlotte, then Columbus, and then Austin. Per household is next. It is used to determine vulnerability because the likelihood of someone getting COVID in the household and giving it to the rest of the persons in the household is high, but not certain. There are some cases where, say, a husband would get COVID, but yet his significant other wouldn't get COVID. Personally, I've had a couple of run-ins with people that in my household that got COVID, but there was other people in my household who never got it, never showed a symptom, and also tested negative for COVID. And this is my visual representation of household maps. Next, we have persons under 5. Children are known as mass spreaders, and while majority of the time will have mild to no symptoms, will spread diseases and viruses like no other age group. Columbus has the highest number of children under 5. Next is Nashville, then Charlotte ties second place with Nashville, and then the last place is Austin, Texas. And here we have the map for the persons under 5. And lastly, my conclusion is that I rank Columbus to be the highest vulnerability, and then Nashville, and then Charlotte, and then Austin, Texas. And that's the end of my presentation. And do I have any questions?
Yes, I have a question.
Yes.
I really did not know that people under 5 were the most vulnerable. I mean, like the most to spread diseases. Like I would have never thought that. So I just wanted to know where you found the information. Like, were you surprised to hear that as well?
I was very surprised. Actually, back in January, I actually caught COVID. This was right after I had my firstborn daughter, and I was completely mortified. I was mortified because, you know, I was kissing on her, loving on her like the day before. And then I went to the doctor, and she was more so concerned about my father, who was in his early 50s, compared to my daughter, who was 3 months old at the time, because she said that just kids, they don't get sick from it for some reason. Well, majority of kids don't get sick from it. There have been cases where unfortunately kids have gotten sick, and unfortunately some have died because of it. But for the majority, kids, they're very resilient. Their immune systems just tend to fight it off a lot better. And so, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're on mute, Dr. Paget.
I think he's in another meeting right now.
Okay.
Oh, who wanna go next? Like, let's just do it. So we don't
Yes.
have to make the video like later, something.
Yeah, go ahead.
I can go.
Yeah, you can go.
Yeah, I didn't.
Hold on. Share screen. Can you all see?
Yes.
I can see.
Okay, so my results were San Antonio, Texas, Portland, Oregon, Birmingham, Alabama, Omaha, and Nebraska. So all right. These are some terms for COVID-19 transmission. COVID-19 is a spread from person to person, mainly through coughing, sneezing, and talking and breathing. So what does this have to do with urban geography? Those population densities with people living next to each other, being in a room with that person, it only takes 15 minutes to get in contact with a person that has COVID. So touching something with the virus, mouth, nose, or eyes can lead to getting infected. Some personal procedures that you should know would be wash your hands, cover your mouth when you're coughing, disinfect surfaces and objects, limit contact with others, and avoid crowds in both indoor and outdoor spaces. That's why some states shut down those specific areas. I know San Antonio was the biggest one, and Birmingham, Alabama was the next. People older than 65 have a higher rate of catching it due to high blood pressure, diabetes, and more diseases that older people can catch. So Alabama, the poverty percentage was 25.9%. Alabama is the sixth poorest state in this nation. That shocked me because I knew that we had a poverty rate of being in the top 20, but I didn't know that we would be number 6. The percent Black would be 69.9%. Like Kenzie said, people that tend to eat greasy foods have a higher chance of catching COVID-19 as well as any other disease. The percent over 65 was 14.9%. The population density was 1,600. The population was 209,403. The percent with asthma was 11.5%, and the COVID index was low. Next, we move on to San Antonio. Like I said, the poverty percentage is 17.9%. The population for this was over 1 million. So that poverty percentage is one of the key factors for this slide, because San Antonio was the first actually to have higher risk vulnerability to COVID-19. The density population was significantly high for them, and the index for San Antonio was medium. Next, we move on to Nebraska. Nebraska was pretty low, I assume, because you rarely hear about Nebraska, not too much, but their population density is high. I think it was the second highest for population density, and the poverty percentage was 13.4%. So those that don't have homes and sourceable income have a higher chance of catching COVID-19 because they don't have the proper tools to protect themselves.
Oh yeah. You're the appointed person.
Mike. Anyways, Portland, Oregon, the social vulnerability for them was the second highest, but their COVID index was low. Poverty percentage was 13.7%, and Black people was 5.8%. These are some layers that I use to actually get my resources. As you can see for this one, this is showing the population density mixed with vulnerability. As you can see, Texas was the highest. Next you have Oregon. Next you have Nebraska, then Birmingham. This is showing the educational background between minorities and other people in that specific area. As you know, education plays a significant role in sources of income, especially for meeting household income as well. This map of the household income for Oregon, Portland, Oregon, they have the highest income for people to buy houses and stuff like that. And next, no, this is Nebraska. This is Oregon. They have the highest in people that 65 and over, and the population density. These are some of the variables that I use to understand my high index to low index. And last but least, my conclusion would be San Antonio, Texas, Birmingham, Alabama, Omaha, Nebraska, and Portland, Oregon. And that's it.
That was a wonderful presentation. Thank you, Perez.
Hold on, stop sharing.
I can go next.
Vicky Howell. Can you hear me? Hello?
Hello?
Oh, sorry. I was just telling you know you were on your phone was off mute. Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry, God. I didn't mean that. Sorry. I'm taking it up and down.
Sorry for the delay. I'm pulling it up right now.
Okay, so who's next?
It's me. I'm trying to get the access for me to share my screen because it's saying that I have to unlock some privacy settings. So I'm doing that right now, but it shouldn't take me long.
Oh, I'm sorry, okay. Yeah, the presentations, I'll go back and watch the recording, but they look really good. I'm in 3 different meetings right now. This one, I'm in a meeting with NASA, and yeah, Perez, I mean, it looked great. It looked great. I just trying to defy that second law of physics, you know, it's just, I'm also in a meeting with you at the university's consortium for atmospheric research. Okay, so here we go. Cameron's up.
All right. All right, so this is my individual term paper, mapping urban vulnerability to COVID-19. So let me move this out the way. COVID-19, formerly known as coronavirus disease, is a respiratory illness that is transmitted from person to person. It can spread mainly between people that are close contact within 6 feet through respiratory droplets when people cough or sneeze that are infected. COVID-19 has not only threatened our health, but also has affected the way we live our everyday lives, whether that's economically, it has affected employment, pretty much changed the way we live our lives. The cities of focus that I was chosen were Memphis, Tennessee, which is my hometown, Washington, D.C., Chicago, Illinois, and New Orleans, Louisiana. And this is just a screenshot from the GIS mapping, just to show you exactly where in proximity the 4 cities that I was chosen that are listed on the map. And so originally, this is the way that I had ranked them. New Orleans first, Washington, D.C. second, Chicago, Illinois third, and Memphis, Tennessee last. So just the fact sheet of New Orleans, the population is 141, and the population density is 705, 749. This is just the longitude and latitude. The population over 60 was 55,000 roughly. The percent over 65 was 14.1%. The social vulnerability index was 0.7449, and the COVID risk index was 0. The percentage of Black people was 59.5. The percent living in poverty was 23.7. The Javion COVID-19 index rating for the community vulnerability was high. The percent of adults with asthma was 12.6. The percent of adults less than 65. The last two are the two variables that I chose to base the rest of my research on, and that was the percent of adults younger than 65 without health insurance, and that was 10.6% for New Orleans, and then the people per household was 2.4, roughly around 2.4. So next, Washington, D.C. I have listed the population density, and the latitude and longitude. So the population over 65 was 395,000. The percent over 65 was 12.1. Social vulnerability index was 0.5965. COVID index was 0. The percent of Black in the population was 46.3. The percent in poverty was 16.2. The Javion COVID-19 index was considered extremely high for the community vulnerability. The percent of adults with asthma was 9.9%. the percent of adults younger than 65 without health insurance was 4.1%, and the persons per household was 2.3%. For Chicago, I have listed pretty much the same information. The population over 65 was 334,053, and the percent over 65 was 12.4%. The social vulnerability index was 0.6755, and then the COVID risk index was 3. The percent of the population that was African American was 59.5%. The percent of the population that was living in poverty was 16.2. The Javion COVID-19 index was extremely high for this population. The percent of adults with asthma was 8.7%. The percent of adults 65 and younger than 65 without insurance was 10.8%. And then the persons per household was 2.8. And for Chicago, I found it very interesting that the population was so large, just because when I was originally ranking them, I had no idea that, the city was that large. I mean, I don't really know much about Chicago, but just on a scale of thinking about it, I just would have never thought that it had that many people. But as far as Memphis, our population is a lot smaller. The population over 65 was 83,337. The percent over 65 was 12.8. The social vulnerability index was 0.7847. The COVID risk index was 1. So as you can see, for Memphis, the majority of our population is majority African American, which I kind of already knew, just based on politically. When it's time to vote, most of our votes are kind of like from the Democratic standpoint. The percent in poverty is 25.1%, which is kind of high compared to the other ones, the other cities. The Javion COVID-19 index was very low. The percent of adults with asthma was 11.2%, and then the percent of adults younger than 65 without health insurance was 15.5%. And then the persons per household was 2.53. So the next segment is the screenshots from our GIS mapping, and it's just basically laying out the maps that I've mainly focused on, just the logistics. So the first one that I focused on the most to help me decide, to re-rank my cities was the percent of adults with asthma. As we all know, COVID-19 is a respiratory disease, so people with asthma are more likely to have the worst side effects of it if they do contract the disease. So it already makes it harder for people to breathe with the disease, so people with asthma kind of get it worse. And this just kind of lays out exactly which areas had it the most. So as you can see, New Orleans had the largest, Memphis was next, and then Washington, D.C., and then Chicago had the least. And then next was the percent of individuals in these cities with poverty. So Washington had 16.2%, Chicago had 18.4%, and then Memphis and New Orleans had the higher percentages of people living in poverty, which was 23.7% and 25.1%. Next was the population over 65 in these cities. Chicago had the most. The next was Memphis, and then Washington, D.C., and then New Orleans last. So as we all know, as we age, our immune systems get weaker. So of course, the people that are 65 and over have a harder chance of their immune systems don't really have that much of a chance, because there are people who have survived it, but it's kind of harder for them compared to someone who might be 19 or 20 with no pre-existing health conditions to fight off the disease. Then next was the persons without health insurance that are younger than 65. And it was kind of disappointing to me that Memphis had the most, just because that's my hometown. And, health insurance is kind of something that's needed, not even just during the pandemic, but in general. And then Chicago was next. New Orleans was the next to be ranked, and then Washington, D.C. And then lastly, I used the JV COVID-19 index levels to help me further my consideration for the rankings. And as far as that, let's see, I'm pulling it. So for Washington and Chicago, they had extremely high, and this was due to for Washington D.C., they had high access to employment. However, they did have some housing instability, but they also had a low percentage of the population between the ages 65 and 75. So that kind of put them lower as far as most vulnerable. As far as Chicago, Chicago had extremely high community vulnerability, but also had low prevalence of comorbidities. I'm sorry, I butchered that. But basically, that just means the people in those areas don't really have those high risk, like pre-existing health conditions, as far as like diabetes or congestive heart failure that make it harder for them to fight off the COVID-19 disease. And Memphis was considered very low, and this was due to the below average school performance and high environmental health hazards. So it was determined after I was looking through the research on the JVON site that Memphis is more likely to have health deserts and as I just previously stated, the low education performance rate. So that kind of makes it harder for people to be educated on the resources they have. And then also with the food deserts, that makes it harder for them to access, the resources they need to survive during the COVID pandemic as well. And I kind of already figured that just because of the project that we did not too long ago with the food mapping. So Memphis does have several food deserts. So that's something else to consider when I was ranking my cities. And then lastly, New Orleans had a high community vulnerability rate. And this was due to the below average labor market engagement, access to average access to employment, and then most of their population, there was a high percentage of people working in healthcare and a low percentage of population above 75. So finally, this is my final ranking. As we can see from the information I just provided, Memphis did come up to be the most vulnerable just because we lack the support, like not even financially, but just health-wise. Like we do have a lot of hospitals, but we don't really have the resources, like as far as like I just mentioned, the food deserts and stuff. We don't really have those resources. So if you don't have if you're not middle to upper class, you don't really have access to those type of things. And so New Orleans was next, and then Chicago, and then Washington DC was actually figured to have the most well-off population, just because they have more access to resources for their residents. And then I was kind of shocked that Chicago was third just because the population was so large, but they do have a lot of resources to help provide for their residents. And then so next is just my sources, and that's it.
Okay, that was well done. I guess anybody have any questions?
Why you said that Washington will be on the bottom of your list?
Because they had the most resources, and per the statistics that I provided, they had the lowest numbers because of the resources that they provide. Like the population over 65 was very low. And also their percentage of poverty wasn't as high as New Orleans, Chicago, or Memphis.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I guess, let's see, I was gonna ask something. Could you, would you mind going back to your the asthma map?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Oh, okay.
Sorry about that. I didn't know it was going to start it all the way over. There you go.
Okay. So, yeah, if you remember during the class, we looked at this issue in terms of percent versus numbers. And so clearly, you said that Chicago's the third largest city in the United States after New York and Los Angeles. And clearly, yes, their percent of adults with asthma is lower than New Orleans by just a few percentages. But in terms of healthcare planning, what 12% of what Chicago, this is at least maybe it's more than 5 million. I think it was like 6 million at least. So 10% of that would be what 600,000. So you've over 600,000 people in Chicago with asthma, well, adults. But I think New Orleans population is probably right around, it might not even be a million. So even though the percentage of New Orleans population with asthma is higher, the raw numbers of people are far greater in Chicago. So I mean, with knowing that, you know, if you were to symbolize this map based upon numbers of people with asthma as opposed to percent, might that change your perspective?
Well, definitely. I know that since there's 12.6% compared like to the compared to the 8.7 over the 8.7 for Chicago, it's still such a large number. I would have to like re-look at it, but
yeah, you probably have to look at like maybe hospital beds. So it could be that even though Chicago has far more adults with asthma, but perhaps they have adequate hospital beds to deal with that than New Orleans does. So if you're looking at it in relative terms, your assessment may be correct that New Orleans has a worse problem if you throw in the variable of available hospital beds. You know, not that there's anything wrong with what you've done, just getting you to think about it a little bit. That's all.
okay, thank you.
Is there another? Who's next? Is anyone next? Thanks, Dr. Amani. Thanks for being here.
I am. Oh, it's not showing. I am, but I don't know why it's showing like that. Okay.
So, Gina Rivera. Okay.
Yeah. Let me. Okay. Okay. Well, today I'll be talking about COVID-19 vulnerability in the U.S. cities. The purpose of this assignment is to research and collect data related to the COVID-19 vulnerability in the U.S. cities. COVID-19 is an infectious disease caused by any virus. The COVID-19 virus spread is quick and from person to person. Population level data is the powerful resource for understanding the virus spreading and which communities are at most risk. The cities I was assigned was Kansas, Tampa, Florida, Dallas, Texas, Columbia, South Carolina, and this was my final city ranking. I decided to put some pictures from each city, the flag and some pictures of the city, and where you see the COVID-19 risk index. As you can see, Kansas City is red, so that means the risk is higher. The second city was Tampa. As you can see in the COVID index 2, is red and it's big. That means there's more cases and the risk is higher too. As for Dallas, we can see, I don't know if y'all know where Dallas is, but it's more at the west east side in the north of Texas. And the color is orange, so it's less risk. And for Columbia, South Carolina, it's almost in the middle, is the capital of South Carolina, and it's orange, so it's like a medium risk. This is my data table. The variables I focus mostly was population. As we can see, Dallas, Texas has the most population with almost more than 1 million. Kansas City is this next one with 495,327. Then goes Tampa, Florida with 399 and 700. And then lastly, Columbia with 131,674. The next variables I focused was social vulnerability index, COVID-19 index, percent Black, percent in poverty, and percent Hispanic and Latinos. This is my ArcGIS map for the 4 cities. My next map is the population. You can see, like I said, Dallas has the most population, is the biggest red dot. Next is Kansas City with 495,000 is the purple dot. Then Tampa with 399, which is the green dot. And lastly, Columbia, South Carolina, which is a blue dot. For the next information was the ArcGIS map of Hispanic and Latino percent population. At Dallas, Texas, we have the most population with almost more than a 41.7% percent. Then it will be Tampa with almost a 30%. Next will be Kansas City, and lastly would be Columbia, South Carolina. For the percent of 65 or older population, Kansas City has the most population. And this is something surprising because even like Kansas City wasn't the city with the most population, it was Dallas. And Dallas has almost the least 65 and older population. Second, we have Tampa. And last, we have Columbia, South Carolina. The percent of Black population, Columbia has the most with almost a 40%. Then it will be Kansas City with almost a 35%. And then it would be Dallas and then Tampa last. The COVID-19 risk index, Tampa and Kansas City were both at 2, while Dallas and South Carolina were both at 0. For the social vulnerability index, Kansas City had the highest. Next, Dallas. Third, Tampa. And fourth, South Carolina. Dallas almost had, as Dr. Paget said, the closer to 1 is the worst. So Kansas was almost close to 1 because it was 0.98. 0.9822. Then it was Dallas with 0.7538. Then Tampa with a 0.701. And lastly, Columbia with a 0.6309. For my discussion, variables such as population, percent of 65 or older population, percent of Black, social vulnerability index, percent for Hispanics, percent of poverty, and COVID-19 index were the key influential components in determining my city ranking. Populations that you factor in the virus spread. Social vulnerability identifies how vulnerable the city is towards disasters. According to the CDC, 8 out of 10 COVID deaths reported in the US have been in adults 65 years old and older. According to the CDC, race and ethnicity are risk markers for underlying conditions that affect health.
The percentage of Black and the percentage of Hispanic Latino communities also play a huge role in the ranking of my series. As for poverty, factors such as race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, and geographic location influence the vulnerability to COVID-19. One interesting finding that I had in my analysis was the percentage of in poverty for each city. The data collected was Tampa with 18.6% in poverty, Kansas with a 16.1, Dallas with a 18.9, and Columbia with a 21.8. For me, that's a high percentage of poverty in a city. The highest percentage corresponded to Columbia, South Carolina, and the lowest percentage was to Kansas. That also surprised because I expected Dallas, since the population is higher, to have the highest percentage for poverty, but it actually didn't. Some recommendations that I would do for mitigating and finding a way to towards COVID will be promoting COVID vaccination, requiring a strict mask policy in every establishment, keep social distancing, emphasizing individual, government, and community responsibility, minimizing disruptions to daily life to the extent possible, adaptation to new life with precautions. In my conclusion, my expected ranking was Tampa, Florida first, Dallas, Texas second, Columbia, South Carolina third, and Kansas City last. My new ranking is Kansas City, Missouri first, Tampa, Florida second, Dallas, Texas third, and Columbia, South Carolina last. All the data collected helped me discover and choose the new ranking variables such as population, percent population 65, percent Black, percent Hispanic Latino, percent in poverty, social vulnerability index, and COVID risk index were the most influential data. Thank you.
Okay, that was well done. I mean, I have a question for Gina, but I'll wait unless any of the rest of you have a question. Okay, I guess I'll ask my question. Gina, it appears from what I saw that you would pretty much recommend not opening up based upon the data that you saw. That, I mean, I don't know, maybe I misinterpreted, but it sounded like you said this.
No, I recommend it, like, keep the guidelines, like the restrictions now, but adapting to new life, because we don't know how long COVID is going to be. Like right now we have vaccination and we have like taken measures towards it, but I mean, we have to adapt and live. Like, it might not be over soon. Like, we can't stop our lives and our daily life. That's why I say minimize, like, I was a word. Give me a second, let me. The disruptions on your daily life, yeah.
Yeah, so
like to an extent.
Oh, I'm sorry. What were you saying?
No, I say like minimize the daily life disruption to an extent. Like, and then I said adapting to the life with precautions.
So are you in Puerto Rico right now, or are you?
Yes, I am.
So how would you compare situation there versus on the mainland US in terms of COVID?
Here, since COVID started, we have had curfew, and it's really strict. The first time I came back, it was in March, and we had like a curfew starting at, if I'm not mistaken, at 8 o'clock, and it ended at 5 a.m. That was the first. Then they started a new like regulation that it was like you can't be outside your house unless you're going to the pharmacy, grocery store, or you have an emergency, you have to go to the hospital. So like when that was on, I remember I went running, and literally police like literally told me I had to go back home, that I couldn't go, like I couldn't be in the streets running. Even though we had had donations and all of those regulations, COVID here spread really quickly. And right now, the COVID cases are up there. Comparing to the US, like we're a small island. And I read an article the other day. And if you see Puerto Rico compared to Florida, we're almost a city in Florida, like we that small. And we actually have like our percentage of cases is actually higher than a whole state in the US. So that's like really risky and that's like bad. I would say like here is worst than like in the US, even though in the US is bad.
So, I mean, is the vaccination distribution, I mean, here you can pretty much get vaccinated anywhere, anytime you want. I mean, is it at that point there? Is it still kind of lagging behind?
Right now, I think they just start authorizing like vaccination to the other people because they were doing it in phases, like old people with underlying conditions, and now it's like everyone can get vaccinated. So I think we're good, but the cases keep going up. And since we like lately, we have got a lot of tourism. Like everyone's coming to Puerto Rico, honestly, and it has affected too, like the cases.
Oh, okay. So do you see are you able to see a difference if you can in the touristy areas? I mean, are they more loose with the constraints and therefore maybe you're getting more spread there? That's what happened in Nashville.
Yeah, there's definitely more spread in those areas, those tourist areas, because the restrictions are there, but it's like people don't care, and at the same time it's hard to like maintain those laws and regulations when people that are coming really don't know like what's been set up here. They just come here to have fun.
Yeah, the same thing kind of happened in Nashville where the city really didn't want to shut down. I mean, Nashville has a big tourist industry, and for a while, tourists were allowed to just walk around with no mask. I mean, this was when COVID was kind of bad. And then there was, but yeah, so we kind of had the same thing. Okay, well, thank you very much, Gina. Who's next up? Anybody? Is there anybody left?
Yes, it's me, Carrington.
Okay, all right.
Okay, I'm gonna share my screen. I'm presenting. All right. So, hold on. Let me move y'all out the way so I can. Okay. So this says urban vulnerability to COVID-19. So what is, hold on, I have to move you out the way. Okay, what is COVID-19? According to the CDC, COVID-19 is a new disease caused by a novel strand of the coronavirus. Since this virus is airborne, it spreads mainly through close contact and physical touch. And COVID-19 is a special case because some people are asymptomatic and still infect others around them. So I think like that's what causes the mass hysteria around the world. So my original city rankings were he gave us 4 cities. I got Atlanta, Georgia, Durham, North Carolina, Albany, Georgia, and Bowling Green, Kentucky. And I first rated them like Atlanta was first, Durham second, third Albany, and then fourth Bowling Green, Kentucky. And I based that off of just me. I'm familiar with Atlanta. I've never been to Durham before, but I feel like it was a bigger city. So I put that one second, and then Albany, I know it's like small. I passed through it going to TSU, so I didn't really think it had that much of impact. And Bowling Green, it actually stayed there. You guys will see. It was much of like, it was in like a medium ballpark the whole way through. So now I'm going to move on to my Excel data and the COVID-19 vulnerabilities that we tracked with it. and I just put my map data here. So here's our population, and this is by population number and city size. So as you see, Atlanta's the big purple dot, and this city was the most populated out of all 4 of my cities. It was the biggest, like really big though. So like you see, Atlanta has a 506,811 people that live here, while the smallest is in Bowling Green, Kentucky, which is only 70,000. So I had a range in my cities. And that's another reason why I put it first. I felt like Atlanta would have the most vulnerability, but my mind actually changes as I I went through this project. This is the population density, and I feel like it's a positive correlation because Atlanta had the most population, so it is the most dense city out of these 4. And this is also the population over 65. And I feel like this is kind of not tricking me, but in a way, it was like confirming that I thought Atlanta was going to be the most vulnerable. But after this, it kind of changes. I changed my perspective because the population over 65, I feel like that just accounts because Atlanta has such a high population. So of course, they're going to have more older people in that population. That's just kind of the way I was thinking about it. Because when I go to the social vulnerability index, it actually moves. We see Albany, Georgia, this small city down here, right here, has the biggest social vulnerability index. And that just means that people are unable to have like readily access to things we should just have, like running water, toilets, tissue paper, feminine products, anything like that. So everything kind of shifts. So you see Albany is has the most social vulnerability. Then we see Bowling Green, Kentucky, followed by Atlanta, then North Carolina, because they're kind of the same. They're only a 1 point difference. 0.1 difference. So I don't know why this is the title didn't show up. This is the Javion COVID-19 index, and the red dots are highlighted by very high COVID-19 index. You can't see the one for Atlanta because the name is over it, but it had a red dot as well. But I was surprised when Albany did have a red dot. But now that I started thinking about it, it could have been just because it is a smaller city with people packed in one place, and the social vulnerability is so high. So maybe it does make sense that the COVID-19 index is higher because, when we have things that affect urban cities, mostly affect the people that live in low income housing and Black and brown communities. I thought this one was pretty cool because this is the percent of adults with asthma, and asthma plays a huge role when it comes to COVID-19 because that is a condition that they already had before they got it, before you get COVID-19. And since COVID-19 is a respiratory condition, it affects people like this higher. But we see the city that has the highest percentage is Albany, and Atlanta actually doesn't have any yellow. So it's kind of in a medium range, which I found to be interesting. So we have Albany, and then we have Bowling Green, Kentucky, then North Carolina, Durham, North Carolina, then Atlanta. So this is where really I changed my mind, and I wanted to redo my ranking because I felt like that it wasn't about, like, with all things considered, the population and population density did not play a huge role as percent of adults with asthma and social vulnerability when it comes to risk and COVID-19. Then this is one of my choices that I had picked for the variables, which is a number of people per household. Again, we see Albany taking the lead on this one. So I feel like this also plays a big part when it comes to COVID-19 vulnerability, because if we have a lot of people in one house, in one area, and COVID-19 is airborne and it spreads really quickly. We don't even know the incubation period. So it could be from 2 to 14 days. So it's like, I feel like they will be at risk to get COVID more since they have more people living in each household. And I feel like it makes sense because these are not just talking about big houses. We can go from like, complexes, apartment complexes to, 1-bedroom houses, or even a big house, but it's the amount of people that live in there is larger than all of my other cities. Even Atlanta is actually the smallest. So another choice that I picked was the deaths from COVID-19. And I felt like when I got to this last part, it was kind of like, wait, a question mark, because my heart was set on saying I felt like Albany was, the biggest one to have the risk after all my research. But when I got to this last variable, Atlanta had the most deaths. But I want to say that accounted for the amount of people that we have in our city. Like if Atlanta has 500,000 people and more in their city and it's growing, my smallest city, Albany only has about 10,000 people. So I feel like that this is a positive correlation with the data that was provided earlier, as in how much population it is, because I still want to say that Albany poses the greatest risk for COVID-19. So like I've been saying, my final city rankings ended up being Albany, Georgia first, second, Atlanta, Georgia, third, Durham, North Carolina, and then fourth, Bowling Green, Kentucky. And this was for many reasons. I really felt like the asthma, the percentage of those with asthma, the social vulnerability, and the fact that more people lived in per household in Albany really plays a bigger part than the other variables that Atlanta was beating Albany out in. Durham and Bowling Green, Kentucky, I didn't see much movement in those. They were really middlemen. They stayed in the same spot and also had 0 to 1 COVID risk index, while Albany had 3, which was closer to 6 than anyone, and Atlanta only had 2. I wanted to add this in here because it kind of like brings in like why I ranked that in. Like one thing that stood out to me was how the cities are drastically different in sizes. Like you have a massive Atlanta city, multi-nucleated city versus these smaller cities that you might just pass through when you're traveling through town. And so they weren't even relatively the same size, but however, they have some of the same similarities. So we see how like racial disparities can still play a part in all cities, no matter like how big they are and how many people they're in. And I feel like if I was to go farther with this activity, I would need much more than rankings on this website to like basically get a whole idea on how COVID-19 really impacts each city, because I feel like the variables can like kind of cancel each other out. So while Atlanta has a bigger population, but Albany has more people living in each household. So it's kind of like on the fence, but I feel like that Albany, Georgia still poses the greatest risk for COVID-19. And I believe that laws and social interactions also play a huge role in determining the vulnerability of COVID-19 has on the city. And I feel like because those two institutions deal with a person's morals and values, it's all about like how we act out. So like if the government tells us to wear a mask and we don't wear a mask, and they saying this is how we can stop the spread or stop from getting other people sick, it's like all about that person and what they believe in and who they're listening to. So I feel like if to see successful mitigation techniques in the future with COVID-19, we would need like a really steady government to like lead us in, because when we were going through the pandemic, we didn't have that. So I feel like that's what caused it to like linger on and stay in these cities, and ultimately the risks get higher and higher. And that's all I have. And I just referenced my map because that's where I got all my information from.
Okay, I have a question for Carrington, but if anyone else has a question and would like to ask first, go right ahead.
Good job, Carrington.
Any questions? Okay, I'll go ahead and ask my question. And so Carrington, it's very interesting results. So where was Albany at first in your rankings? I don't remember.
Albany was third in my rankings.
So it was third, ended up on top. So was your ranking swayed was your final ranking putting Albany above Atlanta? Was that swayed in any way by media reports, news, or just purely the data?
Well, okay, so not really reports of those specific cities, but when in my actual paper, I was referencing different articles that talked about like areas with like lower socioeconomic values and more people like densely populated areas. And it did like, so with that plus my data, that's what was swayed my choice to do to put Albany on top. Cause like I felt like the easy choice was Atlanta, because when I first got my cities, I was like, oh, that's easy. And plus I'm familiar with Atlanta. I live 40 minutes from Atlanta. Like I go there a lot. So it's like I see the practices that people take and how many people actually are in there, how congested the traffic is. So I felt like they would have a greater risk for COVID-19. But when I looked at different types of data, so like how many people per household, the social vulnerability index, and also the COVID-19 index, Albany's data was just greater. So it made more sense that they would have the bigger risk. But at the same time, it's hard to compare. I feel like almost a city that's massive as Atlanta to Albany, because I feel like that's what my data was a little bit skewed, because with Atlanta, everything was just on a greater scale and number. So it might not have shown a true representation of what Atlanta is versus Albany, because of how far the gap is in between how many people we have in each city.
Yeah. What's interesting is if you follow the news, I mean, Albany, Georgia was a hot spot. I mean, bad hot spot for COVID from very early on. So I was wondering if you had seen that. But if
I didn't even realize that.
Okay. Well, I mean, you might want to, maybe add that to your conclusion that your results, even though you were sequestered away from the news, actually jive with reality. So, yeah, Albany, Georgia was a really, really bad hotspot for a while as far as deaths, cases, if you go back and look at the news from last year. So apparently your analysis was pretty valid and spot on in that regard. Okay, good job. So I think Elijah said he's going to go next.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Dr. Patton? Okay. All right, guys. So good afternoon. I am Elijah Poston. This is my individual term project, the Urban Population Vulnerability to COVID-19. So as we got the project background, as you guys know, we've been living through this pandemic. There's been a lot of businesses to boom through COVID-19. A lot of studies showing factors that influences communication and more studies into it. We have a vaccine now. This project that we're doing, the vulnerability project, it will assist us in knowing how different factors affect an area's vulnerability to COVID-19. And so Dr. Padgett assigned us 4 cities, and initially he asked us to blindly rank them from 1 being the most vulnerable to 4 being the least vulnerable. I was assigned Seattle, Washington, Detroit, Michigan, Phoenix, Arizona, and Orlando, Florida. And when asked to blindly rank my cities from most vulnerable to least vulnerable, I had Detroit as most vulnerable, Orlando, Phoenix, and then Seattle as least vulnerable. So we did an Excel sheet. We did an Excel sheet to fill out all the information that could impact the vulnerability ranking. Some of the information included the population of the city, the percentage of the population that's Black, the percentage of the population in poverty, the percentage of the population with asthma, and the list goes on. So we were tasked with finding 2 variables of our choosing, and my variables were the population without healthcare and the population with diabetes. I chose the population without healthcare as my extra variable because COVID-19 is more communicable among those people who can't receive treatment for it. people who don't have health care. And I chose the percentage of the population with diabetes because COVID-19, we all know, it has a higher mortality rate among those with pre-existing health conditions. So we were assigned to put the data we collected into a map on ArcGIS. Okay, don't know why that happened. Okay, this is the raw data that we collected initially. So you have Orlando, Phoenix, Seattle, Detroit. One thing that surprised me here, I used to watch the Weather Channel a lot when I was a kid. And so I was always seeing the different cities and populations and how many people were affected by different kind of severe weather. The census showed that Phoenix, Arizona had the highest population, which sort of surprised me. Let's see, you have population over 65, percent over 65, social vulnerability index, and the list goes on. So this is a screenshot from my map. Here you have the percentage in poverty. And Detroit is leading among these 4 cities. You see Detroit is number 1. Looks like Miami or Orlando is number 2. Miami, Orlando number 2, Phoenix 3, and then Seattle 4. And this is figure 2, the percentage of the population that's Black. This did not surprise me either. I've been to Detroit. I have family in Detroit. Detroit is roughly 78% Black, followed by Orlando, then Phoenix, then Seattle. And this is the percentage of adults with asthma. And this is more evenly distributed among the 4 cities. Detroit still comes in at number 1, Orlando at 2, Phoenix at 3, Seattle at 4. And then population over 65. This did surprise me a bit. I expected Florida, Florida is the place where a lot of people like to go to retire. I expected Orlando to have the highest, but actually you see Detroit has the highest, followed by Seattle, followed by Phoenix, and then Orlando comes in at last. But the percentages are relatively close. I believe that the dot, like the radius marker, is sort of misleading with how large the numbers are. And this is the percentage of adults with diabetes. Detroit leads here, followed by Orlando, followed by Phoenix, and then Seattle last. And by now, I'm pretty sure you're seeing the trend with Detroit leading in a lot of the vulnerability, vulnerability data. Now, this is the link to my map. And so what does this collected data mean? So the results gathered from our research show how vulnerable different areas are to COVID-19. Each piece of data was significant to the research, obviously some more significant to the vulnerability index than others. For example, percentage Black, social vulnerability index, poverty are all say more to vulnerability than latitude or longitude, for example. How has this data changed my rankings? So my hypothesis was actually spot on. As you saw in the data showed that Detroit ranked first in percentage over 65, percentage Black, percentage of diabetes, and percentage of the population with asthma. And they also had a very high Javion COVID ranking. And Seattle was last in my rankings. Seattle ranked last in percentage of population in poverty, percentage of population with diabetes, percentage with asthma, social vulnerability index, and population without health insurance. So recommendations for the rest of the year. I believe masks should continue to be mandated, especially in these cities with high social vulnerability indexes. We all know the stigma with Black and brown people as far as getting vaccines. A lot of Black and brown people aren't comfortable with getting vaccines. To make sure that these people get vaccinated, you know, if they actually want to, we should make vaccines more readily available in communities. You can go to your local Walmart, CVS, Target, wherever, and get a vaccine. But I believe there should be efforts made to bring these vaccines into the community so people won't have to leave and further their risk of communicating the virus. We should also continue to educate the public on vaccinations and habits to stay healthy and stop the spread. And this is my works cited.
Okay, does anyone have any questions for Elijah before I ask? Okay, I guess I'll ask. So Elijah, so I noticed that Seattle was your lowest ranked city after you did your analysis, correct?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'll ask you the same question I asked Carrington. Like, I guess you probably couldn't have been influenced by the media, because if you all remember,
it was where it outbroke.
Seattle was the first hotspot, whatever you want to call it, city. So, but apparently that was, maybe it was, what am I trying to think? It was just a coincidence of geography that, well, yes and no. Because certainly the West Coast does have greater interaction with the Far East. However, you know, and that's where we got all these theories about the virus starting in China. But when they started to trace the DNA of the virus, they found that the other big outbreak spot on the East Coast in New York and New England, that those cases came largely from Europe. But one interesting thing that you might not have, you might remember, you might not, is that of course we had, you know, China, and then the other big hotspot was Italy, right? You might ask, well, why Italy? Well, historically, there's a historical relationship between China and Italy that goes way back through from the time when, you know, there was this Silk Road trading routes and all of that. And so what happened was, when the outbreak occurred in China, a lot of the people who had connections to Italy left China and came back home to Italy. And that's, you know, what caused that spread. Here domestically, a lot of people in New York, you know, that was another big hotspot, went down to Florida to get away from COVID. And that's how we saw that the migration of disease happen there. But I just found it interesting that on one hand you had Seattle, that was the hot spot, it was in the news, but now it's last in your ranking. But then with Carrington, Albany was another really serious hotspot, and hers wound up being highest ranked. So I just made a comment, just interesting observation there. Obviously, this is more of an exercise in using data to come to a conclusion, or a conclusion based upon the data that you have available. Obviously, you probably are getting an idea of how much data goes into making predictions about the pandemic or endemic nature of any disease, because you know, we have to make decisions about resources, hospital beds, where do we send vaccines, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So much has to be taken into account. So with Carrington's case, okay, Atlanta, much larger than Albany, but Atlanta is it's interesting. Atlanta, on one hand, has a lot of wealth, right? But it's also the city in the United States that has the greatest wealth disparity, the greatest difference in wealth between the wealthy people and the poor people is Atlanta. I think there was a show a couple of years ago with this Gambino. Yeah, that TV show Atlanta, I think, was made to illustrate that. Yeah, what you think you know about Atlanta, you know, the parties, the celebrities, blah blah blah, is not all of Atlanta. You know, you got Bankhead and the Bluffs and all of that in Atlanta too. Anyway, so very well done, very interesting. See, Sophia said she's going to go next.
Yes.
Okay. Uh,
Do y'all see it?
Yes, we can.
Well, good afternoon. I'm Sophia Garcia, an animal science major, and today I'm going to talk about COVID-19 vulnerability in the US. COVID-19 and the purpose of this assignment. COVID-19 is a new disease caused by a novel or new coronavirus that has not previously been seen in humans. And a fun fact, I took animal health disease this past semester, and coronavirus is something old when it comes to horses and cows, but relatively new to humans. So that's a fun fact. COVID-19 has, normally you have mild symptoms. It can also cause severe illness and even death whenever, you know, it has other underlying conditions within the patient. In this assignment, the purpose of this assignment is that we have 4 assigned cities and explain which one will be the most vulnerable to COVID-19 and which one is less vulnerable to the virus. Also convey the different data regarding the cities. The cities that I had were Miami, Minneapolis, Baltimore, and San Francisco. And this is what I put, like, this is the order that I put for my expected ranking for vulnerability, but it changed just a little bit. Once in my conclusion, y'all will see the difference. And these are some pictures of Miami, Minneapolis, Baltimore, and San Francisco. And here's my map, but you know, I have pictures of it, so we don't have to go into it. Here's my table of the variables within the cities. In Miami-Dade County, Florida, as can be seen, it has the higher population between the 3. Like this one was the one that had like, as can be seen, you know, 6,940, while Minneapolis City had 421,606, while Baltimore had a population of around 593,490. San Francisco had 881,000, around 5. It says 550/549 whenever in the census, so I just went with 549. The population density, it varies a lot. Like for me, honestly, I thought that Miami will have more population density since it had the bigger population, but it's small regarding, you know, the other populations that are like a smaller number but have like already thousands of population density. As can be seen, in Miami-Dade also the population over 65 is bigger, also the percent, and it's around 16%. In Minneapolis is 10%, in Baltimore is 15%, and in San Francisco County is 16%. The social vulnerability index that it was, from a scale from 0 to 1, 0 being the lowest and 1 being the highest. Well, Miami-Dade has the biggest, like the highest social vulnerability index with 0.8175. Then the second highest is that is like mid-high social vulnerability is San Francisco. Then goes Baltimore with 0.3818, and lastly Minneapolis with 0.3092. In the COVID risk index, surprisingly, Miami, Minneapolis, and Baltimore were all high risk since the scale is from 1 to 6. And San Francisco, which is in California, you will think that it's California, a lot of people live there, is actually a 1 of risk index, and they have a very low from 2 cases a week from a scale from 1 to 12. So it's like very low in San Francisco. The percent of Black and African Americans are 7.70% in Miami, 19.20% in Minneapolis. In Baltimore is 62.70%, and in San Francisco County is 5.6. And in San Francisco is the lowest percent, and Baltimore the highest. The percent in poverty, most of them are in the double digits except San Francisco. That's San Francisco 9.50%, while Baltimore is 20.40%, Minneapolis 19.10%, and Miami-Dade has 15.70%. The Javion COVID index is medium for Miami. Dade, Minneapolis is high, Baltimore is very low, and San Francisco is high. The percent with adults with asthma is 7.90% in Miami. The same thing in Minneapolis, 9 points in Baltimore, and in San Francisco is 7.20%. That around 3 of these cities, the percent in adult with asthma was in the same range. And then my other 2 variables, I decided to go with diseases. The first one, cancer, in adults, and in Miami-Dade, it was one of the lowest, that I had 6%. Then Minneapolis had 8.40%, Baltimore had 7.60%, and then San Francisco County had 5.20%. And the last one is the percent in adults with diabetes, which is that actually in Miami-Dade County is the highest one, that has 14.20%. Only Minneapolis City is 7.40%. Baltimore is 11.90%, and San Francisco County is 7%. This is my figure 1, which is the COVID-19 risk. And as can be seen, the biggest one that it's, with bigger than 5, and it's Miami and Baltimore, which both are a number 5 in the scale from 1 to 6. Then goes Minneapolis, and lastly goes San Francisco when it comes to the COVID risk index. For the population, the biggest population is in Miami. I think, a lot of people already know this, and it's not only like old people, but also a lot of Latin people go and live like in Miami. Like I can tell you that a lot of Puerto Ricans, for sure, that I know of live in Miami. Then goes San Francisco, then Washington, and lastly Minneapolis City. My third figure is the social vulnerability index, in which Miami is the most vulnerable, as can be seen, then San Francisco when it comes to social vulnerability, then Baltimore, and lastly Minneapolis. In my figure 4, the poverty percentage, the highest poverty percentage is Baltimore, Maryland. The second highest is Minnesota. That, as can be seen, that the highest poverty is regarding the north area, and also San Francisco, which is, you know, part of northeast part of LA, and it's 15.70. However, Miami has the lowest percent of poverty, which is 9.50. This my last figure, the last like picture of the artist, with which is the population and the percent of adults over 18 years that have cancer. And in Miami, as can be seen, has the most population, but the highest adults with cancers is in Minnesota. Then goes Minneapolis, then go Miami, and lastly, San Francisco. After analyzing, understanding the different aspects in the city, my final rank as which cities are more vulnerable to COVID and its negative effect is Miami, Baltimore, Minneapolis, and San Francisco. Therefore, I had the first one and the last one correct. I just mixed up Minneapolis and Baltimore. Like my expect, like the first one was Minneapolis first, then Baltimore. And there are many variables taken into consideration, such as location, because, for example, Miami is a place where a lot of people go visit and tourist, and it's in Florida, which is, you know, recognized as one of the epicenters of COVID too, after this whole pandemic started. There's other variables such as COVID-19 restrictions and the different like states and how they divide each other. Other diseases that make people more susceptible to the virus, such as lung problems, diabetes, and many more. And the last one is the inevitable economic and social injustices towards low-income communities. What did I miss before the analysis? That it was a question about like, what do we think before, what made me choose what I chose? And it was that I only focused on what I knew. Like I knew about every city, and I know that Miami was the most populated, but between Minneapolis and Baltimore, I didn't have much like, I didn't know too much. Then I did not consider like how the different counties will be regarding the restriction and regulation, or in which phase of the COVID protocol they're following, because I know there are states where you don't have to wear a mask, but there are others that you have to wear a mask, and there's still guidelines that people are following. So it just depends. And also I overlook the type of resources that each city may have to treat the people that were infected, because there are places that I know personally know that don't have all the resources to treat all the COVID cases that are occurring at the time. Do any of your cities exhibit substantial potential racial or ethnic health? And I would say, like, as can be seen, the poverty and the racial and the poverty and the racial were high percent. So in the article, How Vulnerable is Your Community to Coronavirus? And this new maps reveal a familiar pattern, where Rachel Ramirez, that she states, it's clear that the novel coronavirus is already compounding underlying systemic inequities in communities with more people of color, poverty, migrants, and those without access to resources like medical care. And that statement above shows like and conveys like how even in the worst times, that we're in a pandemic, discrimination and injustices against minorities, which are the ones that need more help, keep going on. And then for my mitigation strategies, I will recommend to getting vaccinated, or if not, make sure that the CDC guidelines are being followed correctly. I will recommend, also the government to create policies that focus on trying to evade the COVID transmission and make medical resources more available to minorities. And also, I think society should be provided with easy access to COVID-19 tests and vaccines. Thank you for your attention. Any questions?
Yeah, I don't have any questions. It was good, very well done. Unless someone else has a question. I think is everybody presented?
No, I didn't present it. yet.
Okay, so you're
That's
the
pretty
last.
short one. Like,
Okay, you'll close us out for the semester, for Maymester.
okay, sir. Should I start it?
Yes, yeah, you're.
Can everybody see it? My screen?
Yes, we
Yeah, I
can.
can see it. Yes.
Okay. Hi everybody. My name is Keith. This is my individual term paper PowerPoint about urban geography, like the four city how to affect by COVID-19. And this PowerPoint is pretty just a basically just a data data share, because most of questions something I just writing down an essay. I just writing an essay and in the Word document. So the first thing I want to introduce is about the fourth city. I have it. I find the two. The first city is Los Angeles. I find two different pictures. One is before the COVID happened, which means on the right one, it's before COVID happened in Los Angeles. Another one is after COVID happening in Los Angeles. The second city I get is New York. The first one is before. Same thing. The up one is before the COVID-19 happened. The second one is after COVID-19 happened. The third is Cleveland.
Yeah, Cleveland.
Cleveland. I see some broken in my picture. And the next one is Houston. Houston. The right picture down there is before the COVID-19 happened. Like the next is after that. This is the data I get. The data I get from all four city I've been choice, and it's and this is the original ranking. I'm thinking about the first one is Los Angeles, the second one is New York, the third one is Cleveland, the fourth one is Houston. Also, and I think this next picture I chose. I think is something about the what was I forgot. It's about the I think just about the population. In this map, like the New York City has most people in rest of four city, and the Los Angeles is second one, the Houston is third one, and the Cleveland is the last one. The next picture I chosen is COVID risk index. So in this picture, like the Cleveland is the first one, because because depends on the research I have is because of the Cleveland has a lot of old men, so it's pretty large. has a pretty high risk, and the New York is the second one. New York is the second. The Houston is third, and Los Angeles is the fourth. In this map, I just it's a thing is about the Jiva drawing COVID-19 indexed. The Cleveland is the Los Angeles risk is very high. The Houston is a low. The New York is very low. The Cleveland is high. And this picture is a percent in poverty about these four cities. The Los Angeles is 80%. The New York is 70%. The Houston is 72.7%. The Cleveland is 20%. And this one is I found out about the social valuable valuability. Social vulnerability index about the first city. The Los Angeles is 0.72. The New York is 0.1. 0.14. The Houston is 0.74, and the Cleveland is 1. This is for conjecture that available of in the five conjecture available of interest can interesters. I think it can affect about this the four cities. The first one I think is a new mutant virus standards. The two is old vaccine. The old vaccine is failed. It's not working for the mutant virus. The third is no complaints with vaccination regulation. The fourth, nowhere still has a lot of people they didn't wearing a mask. The five is premature community disaggregation, premature community disaggregation. Oh, I'm just writing. Leads to large number of foreign visitor. And the last one I will show is about after all this research, I think the final, as in my head, in my heart, the final city ranking is the first one. I think is Houston. The second one is New York. The third one is Los Angeles. The last one is Cleveland. That's all my PowerPoint have it. Do you have any question for me?
Yes.
It's too short for everybody, for other people.
Yes. So, Kate, are you in you're not in China now? You're here probably? I guess. Right?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah.
I mean, where I am? Where is this place?
Yeah, but I mean, I'm sure you keep in touch with relatives and friends in China. So what have you heard what the status of the virus is there? Is it pretty much under control or?
Yes, sir. Like my parents is like, I asked a lot of my friend, my old classmate in China, and my parents. It's basically is under control in China now. It's like you can go out. Like if you get a two vaccine, you don't need to wear a mask. and you can travel around the country. Is that like just like the news maybe you can find on some some website like show like the China has something like we have a like healthy QR code. It's kind of like it's like a large system, computer system located your phone. So wherever you go, the computer will locate your place you going. And if you're going to some have a higher COVID risk place, then your actual code will just like show a warning to you, and it's turn to green to a yellow and turn to a red. And if your QR code goes to red, and the community people, the computer will just like maybe send you a message to let you know like now you QR, because you have a go to let's have a high risk place, you might get a COVID-19. You touch some people might have the COVID-19. So the QR code turns to a red, and you have to quarantine yourself at home 14 days.
Wow. So, I mean, was the so I guess you saw the response to COVID-19 to the government here, and we don't need to go through that. We know that.
Yeah, like I writing down like I think the most reason about I think it's still under control in America, the COVID-19.
Yeah, but I mean,
it doesn't like
first,
India, just like we still have it doesn't like have people like they have a lot of people that have a high education. They know like this virus is a true thing, and gradually but it's still actually like for me is like in the beginning of this like last year, like a lot of state government they just saying like they don't want to shut down the state something because the environment like I don't know how I forget it. Sorry, just like I think my point is like the government decision is really important because it's not everybody like know what the COVID is it. It's nothing like the President Trump says just a flu or something. It's really seriously.
So there was a difference in the response. So in China, they really like cracked down, but is like here last year it was, it's our president was not even wearing a mask, and almost killed Chris Christie, and he attended that Trump rally in D.C. and he got COVID. Chris Christie got COVID-19, ended up on a ventilator. But in China, the response was much more, this is serious. And yeah, I mean, and that says something because, you've got 1.3 billion people in China, and they were able to, and much higher population density than we have here. And yet it appears they have better control over the virus than we did. Do you know anything about what the vaccine distribution is like in China, or is there one? Or
the one thing I know is like my family already get both of 2 free vaccine already, all my family member, and do you know the people who call Zhong, Mr. Dr. Zhong, like who like maybe the leader of the something who research doing like the vaccine in China, like he say like tell us he basically maybe just yesterday he just using the TikTok not TikTok something video something on TV show to tell us like we should tell like the COVID is now like he tell us like people in China we should ready for like the COVID is not going to leave us. And we may have to be ready like the COVID going to be like really going to be like a regular disease in the world. Maybe we have to take the vaccine every year to protect the people. So they just tell us to be ready because like even like it's already 1 year. So the winter not kill the virus, the summer not kill the virus. So it's really, and it's crazy muting right now, especially for Indian.
Yeah,
we already know like.
Is that the doctor who died? That one you were just mentioning?
I don't know, maybe.
Yeah, I think I think you said that was when it first came out and was warning everybody, and then
Oh, that was I think it's a deep. I think I remember that one. It's this guy. So I can show you a picture. He's the one who like in old in like 2002 who fighting with the SARS in China. So he's pretty famous and it's like everybody and even the young children believe the young generation believe what he say because he's really professor about all this virus thing.
yeah, it was too bad. Okay, so I think that was our last presenter. So I'll be around between now and 11:59 p.m.
I
tonight.
have a question.
Yes.
I just wanted because there was problems uploading the group project. The files were too large. And so what I did is I just uploaded the rubric, and then in the comment section I posted all the links, and I just wanted to make sure if that was okay or if there's
I have
another
an
way
idea
we should
like
go
we
about
can
it.
download it and save as a PDF.
Oh, so you said the group project, the Word project, was too large to upload into the Dropbox. Is that what you're saying?
The Word, the paper as well as the PowerPoint was too large.
Oh, you mean everything combined? So,
No, alone, like everything.
Yeah, alone, like each one was too large. So what I did was I uploaded the rubric because it won't let me post just the comment section, and then in the comment section I entered all three links that we needed to turn in, and I was just wondering if that would be satisfactory, or is there another way that I should upload it?
yeah, I'll take a look at it. Just as long as I get everything, that's fine. And just in case, just as a backup, I think you should be able to send it to me to my Gmail account. And so just in case, yeah, that the inbox it is what it is, you know. So so that's, again, there's my Gmail account in the chat. My Gmail account should be able to handle just about anything. Yeah, that should be able to
Do
handle
we all
just
need
about.
to submit it, or just one designated person need to turn in the project to your email?
Well, in theory, each person should have a copy in his or her Dropbox, but I mean, I know it's a class project, so you don't each have to email me. So if one person emails me everything to that Gmail address, then I'll confirm receipt, and that'll be fine.
I know that I uploaded the PDF of